Last time, we witnessed the birth of a nation. From the fiery protests of the Boston Tea Party to the thunder of muskets in the Revolutionary War, brave patriots defied an empire and declared independence. George Washington rose as a symbol of hope, and with the signing of the Declaration in 1776, the United States of America was born. But freedom was only the beginning. What came next would test the soul of the nation. The American colonies had declared their independence, but making that declaration a reality would be far more difficult. Britain was the world's most powerful empire at the time, with a massive navy, a seasoned army, and deep financial resources. The colonies, on the other hand, were fragmented, poorly armed, and lacked any formal military. Yet, they had something just as vital a belief in their cause and a determination to defend their homes. The Revolutionary War officially began in 1775, but it would stretch on for 8 long years. George Washington, a Virginia planter and former British officer, was chosen to command the Continental Army. Washington had no illusions about the odds. He faced supply shortages, undisciplined troops, and constant desertion. But what he lacked in resources he made up for in resolve. He understood that survival more than winning battles was the key to eventual victory. The early years of the war were grim for the Americans. In 1776, British forces landed in New York with over 30,000 troops, overwhelming Washington's army and taking control of the city. Washington was forced into retreat after retreat, crossing into New Jersey and then Pennsylvania. Morale was dangerously low, but on Christmas night 1776, Washington led a surprise attack across the icy Delaware River, defeating Hessian troops in Trenton. It was a small battle, but a critical psychological victory. It proved that the Continental Army could fight and win. Meanwhile, the British tried to cut the colonies in half by launching a campaign from Canada, hoping to isolate New England. But their plan unraveled at the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. American forces, led by Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold, captured a British army. This victory was more than a turning point on the battlefield. It convinced France that the Americans had a chance. In 1778, France entered the war as an American ally, providing troops, ships, and supplies. Spain and the Dutch would also lend support. Suddenly, Britain was no longer fighting a rebellious colony, it was facing a global war. Despite international help, the fighting continued to be brutal. The winter of 1777–78 at Valley Forge was a symbol of American suffering and perseverance. Soldiers endured freezing temperatures, hunger, and disease. But under the training of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer, they emerged as a more disciplined force. The war shifted south in its later years, where brutal guerrilla warfare broke out in the Carolinas. Cities like Savannah and Charleston fell to the British, but American militias kept the fight alive in the countryside. One of the most decisive moments came in 1781, when British General Cornwallis marched his army into Yorktown, Virginia, expecting reinforcements. Instead, he found himself surrounded by American and French troops on land, and the French Navy at sea. After weeks of siege, Cornwallis surrendered. Though fighting continued in scattered areas, Yorktown marked the practical end of the war. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Britain officially recognized American independence and ceded territory stretching from the Atlantic to the Mississippi River. The war had cost over 25,000 American lives. Many more were wounded or displaced. The economy was in ruins. Yet, against enormous odds, the United States had achieved the impossible. It had not only declared independence, it had won it, but what kind of nation would this be? The Articles of Confederation, adopted during the war, created a weak central government with limited power. It couldn't tax, raise an army, or regulate trade effectively. The states were like small countries, each with its own rules and interests. This loose structure began to fail almost immediately. Debt from the war piled up. Trade disputes erupted. A rebellion in Massachusetts, Shays' Rebellion, exposed just how fragile the new republic was. Leaders knew something had to change. In 1787, delegates from 12 states met in Philadelphia to revise the Articles. But they did much more than revise, they created an entirely new system of government. The result was the U.S. Constitution, a bold experiment in balancing power. It created three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial, designed to check each other. It protected individual rights while giving the federal government enough strength to function. Still, the Constitution sparked fierce debate. Some feared it gave too much power to a central authority. Others worried it didn't go far enough in protecting personal freedoms. To win over skeptics, the Bill of Rights 10 amendments guaranteeing fundamental liberties like freedom of speech, religion, and due process was added in 1791. America now had a new government, a new identity, and a new place in the world. But this was only the beginning. The hard part, turning ideals into practice, managing a divided and diverse population, and staying united in the face of hardship, was just beginning. With the Constitution ratified and the new government taking shape, the United States stepped into uncharted territory. In 1789, George Washington was unanimously elected as the first president. He took office in a modest capital, New York City, at the time with no blueprint to follow, only the hope that a republic could truly endure. Washington's leadership was calm, cautious, and grounded in principle. He knew every decision set a precedent. There were no guarantees. The experiment could still fail. The early years of the Republic were filled with uncertainty and internal divisions. Alexander Hamilton, Washington's Secretary of the Treasury, pushed for a strong central government and a national bank to stabilize the economy and handle war debts. He envisioned a future built on commerce, industry, and international credit. Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State, wanted the opposite: limited federal power and a nation rooted in agriculture and personal freedom. These opposing visions gave rise to the first political parties, the Federalists, led by Hamilton, and the Democratic Republicans, led by Jefferson. Despite tensions, Washington guided the country through its first major domestic crisis, the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794. Farmers in western Pennsylvania, angered by a federal tax on whiskey, rebelled. Washington personally led troops to suppress it, proving the new government had both authority and restraint. After 2 terms, he voluntarily stepped down, setting a vital example of peaceful transfer of power. His successor, John Adams, faced growing conflict with France. In 1798, tensions boiled over into the Quasi-War, an undeclared naval conflict in the Atlantic. At home, Adams signed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which suppressed political dissent and targeted immigrants' laws. That would later be seen as overreaches of federal power. These decisions cost him support. In 1800, Thomas Jefferson defeated Adams in a bitter election. The peaceful transfer of power from one party to another was a milestone, proof the system could work. Jefferson doubled the size of the country. In 1803, with the Louisiana Purchase, buying vast territory from France and opening the West to American expansion. But expansion brought conflict. As settlers pushed into native lands, violence flared. Treaties were made and broken. Entire communities were uprooted. Meanwhile, tensions with Britain rose again. British ships were seizing American sailors and interfering with trade. In 1812, the U.S. declared war on Britain, again the War of 1812. The war was fought across the frontier, at sea, and in cities like Washington, D.C., which British troops burned in 1814, but the war ended in a draw and the Battle of New Orleans, won by Andrew Jackson after the peace treaty had already been signed, gave Americans a sense of victory. Though the war solved little diplomatically, it sparked a surge in national pride. Industry grew. Roads and canals were built to link distant states. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, connected the Great Lakes to the Atlantic, fueling trade and settlement. This period became known as the Era of Good Feelings, marked by economic growth and political unity under President James Monroe. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were forming. The economy was booming, but not evenly. The North was industrializing, building factories, railroads, and banks. The South, by contrast, remained tied to agriculture, especially cotton, and depended on enslaved labor to drive its economy. As cotton production exploded after the invention of the cotton gin in 1793, slavery became more entrenched. Debates over slavery grew louder as new states joined the Union. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 was an early attempt to keep peace by admitting Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, while banning slavery in future territories north of a set line. It was a temporary fix. Meanwhile, the nation's population was moving west. Land was seen as opportunity, and Americans believed it was their manifest destiny to expand from coast to coast. But expansion meant more conflict with native nations. In 1830, under President Andrew Jackson, the Indian Removal Act forced tribes from their homelands in the Southeast. Thousands died on the forced march known as the Trail of Tears. Jackson's presidency also marked a shift in American politics. He claimed to represent the common man and distrusted institutions like the National Bank. His opponents accused him of abusing power, but to many he was a hero, a self-made man who defied elites and reshaped the presidency. By the 1840s, the U.S. had become a nation of contradictions. It was growing, confident, and free for some. But for others, native peoples, enslaved African Americans, and even working-class immigrants, the promises of liberty and opportunity remained out of reach. These contradictions would define the next chapter of American history and, eventually, tear the country apart. As the United States pushed westward, its sense of national purpose expanded too. The idea of manifest destiny took hold. The belief that Americans were destined to rule the continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific. It was a powerful vision, one that fueled ambition, justified conquest, and changed the landscape forever. But with it came deep moral and political consequences. The 1840s were marked by aggressive expansion. In 1845, the United States annexed Texas, which had declared independence from Mexico years earlier. This move infuriated Mexico and led to the Mexican-American War in 1846. American forces, led by generals like Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott, invaded deep into Mexican territory. By 1848, after a series of decisive victories, Mexico was forced to sign the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. The U.S. gained a massive stretch of land now, the American Southwest and California. This vast new territory added to the size and wealth of the country, but it also reignited fierce debates over slavery. Would these new states be slaveholding or free? The Compromise of 1850 was crafted to ease tensions. It allowed California to enter as a free state, but included a Fugitive Slave Act, which required escaped slaves to be returned to their owners even from free states. It outraged many in the North and deepened the divide. At the same time, industrialization was transforming the northern economy. Railroads spread across the country, linking cities and opening markets. Factories drew in workers from rural areas and a wave of European immigrants. Cities like Chicago, Pittsburgh, and New York boomed. But in the South, plantation life remained dominant and slavery became more tightly woven into its culture and economy. Voices against slavery grew louder. Abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and William Lloyd Garrison demanded an end to human bondage. Tubman, a former slave herself, helped hundreds escape through the Underground Railroad. Uncle Tom's Cabin, a novel by Harriet Beecher Stowe, stirred emotions across the country, exposing the brutal reality of slavery to a wide audience. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act allowed settlers in those territories to vote on whether to allow slavery. It overturned previous compromises and led to violent clashes known as Bleeding Kansas. Armed groups fought over control of the territory, a preview of the national crisis to come. The tension peaked with the Dred Scott decision in 1857. The Supreme Court ruled that African Americans, free or enslaved, were not citizens and had no rights under the Constitution. It also said Congress had no authority to ban slavery in the territories. The ruling shocked the North and emboldened the South. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president on a platform opposing the expansion of slavery. He did not initially call for abolition, but Southern states saw his election as a direct threat to their way of life. South Carolina seceded from the Union, followed by others. In early 1861, they formed the Confederate States of America. The Union was breaking apart. In April 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The Civil War had begun. It would be the bloodiest conflict in American history, claiming more than 600,000 lives. The war wasn't just a fight over territory, it was a battle for the soul of the nation. Could a country founded on liberty survive while half of it depended on slavery? As Chapter 2 closes, the United States stands on a knife's edge. Expansion, innovation, and ambition had made it stronger, richer, and more confident. But the unresolved question of slavery, so long buried under compromises and political deals, had come roaring to the surface. The next chapter would decide the fate of the Union itself. Asterisk. If you're finding this journey through real American history insightful and eye-opening, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We're just getting started. There's a lot more to uncover in the next chapter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.